All right, this is Pastor Sonny. Yeah, we're picking up right where we left off in our study of God's plan and purpose for Israel. This is session 8, and we're going to pick up. We were talking about God's name, Jehovah Rophika. All right, let's get back to it. Verse 26 of Exodus chapter 15 contains the name Jehovah Rophika, which means precisely what the verse says. All right, I am the Lord that heals you. This is during the bitter or the poisonous waters incident at Merah, when Israel murmured against Moses in verse 24. Now, as we learn, God's Jehovahness has two elements: timelessness and unlimited capacity. That is, God would provide whatever Israel needed. She had just witnessed his timelessness, as God made good on his promise to Abraham by delivering the nation despite 400 intervening years. Next, Israel got a lesson on the other element of his name, God's unlimited provision on her behalf. The position of the Israelites is clear from the question, what shall we drink? The position of the Israelites, the people thought they were out of options. What should they have said? Come on. They should have said, ask God to give us water. Moses understood this. As we read in verse 25. Verse 25 it says, and he cried unto the Lord. All right. Now some typology is going on here. The tree and waters typify Christ's crucifixion on the cross. But the ultimate issue is God's unlimited ability to provide whatever is needed. Israel no longer had to ask, what shall we drink? Because the Lord Jehovah provided it, living up to his name. In verses 25 and 26, we see the beginning of Israel's education of how God will deal with the nation. Look down at the bottom part of verse 25. It says, there he made for them a statute and an ordinance, and there he proved them. The end of the verse says that at that place God made a statute and an ordinance. It also says he proved them. Now we know statutes, ordinances, and commandments pertain to the law. Now more references are in verse 26. However, the law wasn't given yet. So what was God doing? He was contrasting the two ways in which he could deal with the nation. He put them side by side so Israel could see them both. Remember, this was the beginning of the education process God initiated. God didn't give all 623 ordinances and commandments at this point. But he did give part of what we call the law of Moses. God had just shown that it was necessary to simply rely on his grace to attain what was needed. However, God also showed that the alternative was to get it by performance. Having just seen grace at work, God made an ordinance and a statute. At the end of the verse it says, there he proved them. God was again contrasting how he might deal with the Israelites. He might provide it by grace or prove them based on their ability to keep his statutes. Now we need to read the next verse before we continue so we can see everything under consideration. Verse 26. And said, if thou wilt diligently hearken to the voice of the Lord thy God, and wilt do that which is right in his sight, and wilt give ear to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will put none of these diseases upon thee, which I have brought upon the Egyptians, for I am the Lord that healeth thee. God put this contrast before the Israelites in each trial, so they would see what was most successful. Through these trials, with God proving them, God demonstrated that He could not perform. They could not perform adequately to receive what they needed. God showed them that they must be dealt with on the basis of His name, His Jehovah-ness and grace. At Marah, God demonstrated His grace by responding to the request for water. They had seen Moses' request answered by God's grace. It required nothing on their part. They asked, God answered. The waters were undrinkable, but in response to their need, God gave them all of the drinkable water they needed, and then some. Next, God showed them that the other way to get what they needed was to keep God's commandments and all His statutes. If the Israelites did, they would be free of disease. It is not by accident that God mentioned these diseases in reference to the Egyptians. The bitter waters at Marah were the fallout from the plague on the waters in Egypt. Basically, Israel was being confronted at Marah, whatever it is, with having taken part in those plagues. God showed them that to be worthy, they would have to keep His statutes. The clear message was that they would be up against this type of issue over and over. This education was to show they were best off when God dealt with them by His Jehovah-ness and grace. The alternative to experiencing what happened to the Egyptians would be keeping God's commandments and ordinances. The contrast is again at the end of verse 27. I am the Lord that healeth thee. Israel had to realize that by nature she was in the same boat as the Egyptians. The nation was not separated from the nations of the world because of a natural righteousness and holiness. The seed of Abraham was also the seed of Adam. And by her natural merit, Israel would get what the seed of Adam deserves: judgment and plagues. The only way not to be on the receiving end of God's wrath was to appeal to Him for His Jehovah-ness and grace. The first trial began the proving process. When something is proved, the quality or content of something is revealed. One would prove the ability of a joist to bear weight before trusting its use in a floor. Proving determines if something will measure up. This is what God was doing. He was comparing Israel's performance with His grace. In proving them, God showed them what was in them. God would face the Israelites with this reality over and over on the way to Mount Sinai. The reality was that Israel could not perform well enough to avoid the consequences of violating His law. Her only hope, was to have God's Jehovah-ness and grace. We can see the proving concept again in Deuteronomy chapter 8, where Moses spoke to the nation. Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 2. And thou shalt remember all the way which the Lord God led thee these 40 years in the wilderness, to humble thee, and to prove thee, and know what was in thine heart, whether thou wouldest keep His commandments or no. Look at all the amplifying terminology in this verse. God proved Israel to show what was really inside, what the Israelites were made of. and to show them whether they could keep his commandments. Look at verse 14 of Deuteronomy chapter 8. Then thine heart will be lifted up, and thou forget the Lord thy God, which brought thee forth out of the land of Egypt, from the house of bondage, who led thee through the great and terrible wilderness, wherein were fiery serpents and scorpions and drought, where there was no water, who brought thee forth water out of the rock of flint, who fed thee in the wilderness with manna, which thy fathers knew not, that he might humble thee, and that he might prove thee, to do thee good at thy latter end. And thou say in thy heart, my power and my might of mine hand hath gotten me this wealth. He was seeking to humble Israel and convince her that she could not be dealt with on the basis of the law. God was showing that the nation must be dealt with on the basis of his Jehovahness and grace. Now there's more to see, and I encourage you to go back and study through this on your own. Alright? Now we're going to go look at the next trial in Exodus chapter 16. I hope you're ready for this. Now the second trial is hunger in the wilderness of sin. Let's take a look at it. That trial that God put the nation through. We'll discover this in Exodus chapter 16. Verse 2, and the whole congregation of the children of Israel murmured against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the children of Israel said unto them, would to God we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots, and when we did eat bread to the full. For ye have brought us forth into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. God had already shown them that he could provide water where there was none. But as soon as they were hungry, they began to complain that they were going to die of hunger. Many of you with kids understand that a little bit, I'm sure. This is quite amazing, since the song sung in chapter 15 indicated that they understood God's purpose for them. That he was guiding Israel to his holy habitation. They sang about the great wonders their God had done, and the terror that would strike the hearts of the inhabitants of the land that was given to them. They sang that they would be planted in the mountain of God's inheritance, in the place which God himself would dwell. If they really believed that, then why did they doubt? However, that's not the real issue here. The real issue was that they were incapable of keeping a performance contract. The point of the 5 trials was to prove this to them. Alright, Exodus chapter 16 verse 4. Then said the Lord unto Moses, behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a certain rate every day, that I may prove them whether they will walk in my law or no. In other words, he's saying, I'm going to prove to them again that they can't do it. They can't follow my instruction. Understand that the law contract had not been given yet, because they hadn't reached Mount Sinai yet. And God was showing them exactly what it would take if they were going to be dealt with on the basis of the law. And by these things we know that when Israel assented to the law contract, the nation did not do so in ignorance, but with the full knowledge of what the law demanded. Verse 5, and it shall come to pass that on the 6th day they shall prepare that which they bring in, and it shall be twice as much as they gather daily. And Moses and Aaron said unto all the children of Israel, at even Then ye shall know that the Lord hath brought you out of the land of Egypt. And in the morning, then ye shall see the glory of the Lord, for that he heareth your murmurings against the Lord. And what are we, that ye murmur against us? Now the gathering of twice as much manna had to do with preparations for the Sabbath. Verse 7 reveals the Lord as their provider. In the morning ye shall see the glory of the Lord. What would they see in the morning? They would see manna. What should they think when they saw it? They should think that God had graciously provided for them, and He provided what they needed and could not provide for themselves. That was the glory aspect of His Jehovahness, His great provision for them, and God's name at work on their behalf. This is why their murmurings against Moses and Aaron were categorized as murmurings against the Lord. They were complaining against God's unlimited capacity to be what they needed. You should spend time studying the details of regarding the quail and the manna not lasting more than a day. Now, before we move on, notice that their inability to keep the law was made evident. We saw this in verse 4, where God gave them a commandment concerning a certain rate of manna to gather. Verse 4, Then said the Lord, Go unto Moses, Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a certain rate every day, that I may prove them whether they will walk in my law or no. Look at verse 14. And when the dew that lay was gone up, behold, upon the face of the wilderness there lay a small round thing, as small as the hoarfrost on the ground. And when the children of Israel saw it, they said one to another, It is manna. For they wist not what it was. And Moses said unto them, This is the bread which the Lord hath given you to eat. This is the thing which the Lord hath commanded. Gather of it every man according to his eating, and an omer for every man, according to the number of your persons. Take ye every man from them which are in his tents. And the children of Israel did so, and gathered, some more, some less. And when they did meet it with an omer, he that gathered much had nothing over, and he that gathered little had no lack. They gathered every man according to his eating. They only took what they could eat. You understanding me? You've just read the perfect provision that God made for them when He told them the rate at which they should gather the manna. How did they obey what God commanded of them? Verse 19. And Moses said, Let no man leave of it till the morning. Notwithstanding, they hearkened not unto Moses. You notice that? Notwithstanding, they hearkened not unto Moses. But some of them left of it until morning. And it bred worms, and stank. And Moses was wrath with them. And they gathered it every morning, every man according to his eating. And when the sun waxed hot, it melted. They did not obey the command. Now, as we continue the chapter, we will see they failed again with regard to the command not to go out on the Sabbath day and gather manna. It came to pass, verse 22, that on the 6th day they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers for one man, and all the rulers of the congregation came and told Moses. And he said unto them, This is that which the Lord hath said. Tomorrow is the rest of the holy Sabbath unto the Lord. Bake that which ye will bake today, and seeth that ye will seethe. And that which remaineth over lay up for you, and be kept until morning. Now remember, we read earlier that if they took more than they needed and tried to save it for the next day, it spoiled, and the worms got in it, and it got nasty. But here God's telling them on the sixth day. And they laid it up till the morning, and Moses bade, and it did not stink, neither was there any worm therein. And Moses said, Eat that today. For today is the Sabbath unto the Lord. Today ye shall not find it in the field. 6 days ye gather it. Ye shall gather it. But on the seventh day, which is the Sabbath, in it there shall be none. And it came to pass, and there went out some of the people on the seventh day for to gather, and they found none. Look at the Lord's response in the next verse. Verse 28. And the Lord said unto Moses, How long refuse ye to keep my commandments and my laws? The ye shows us that God was directing the comments to the people through Moses. In less than a week, they had demonstrated over and over that they could not keep God's commandments. He gave them these little things to prove to them that they couldn't. This was the second trial in the nation's education. And and Israel must have God deal with them on the basis of His Jehovah-ness and grace. The second trial, however, was the first time that God made it evident that Israel could not keep His laws and commandments. God was proving that the nation could not get what was needed on the basis of human performance. God was showing the people that what was in their heart was not what they thought. God knew they were incapable and was educating them about it. That was the purpose of these trials. These incidents didn't just happen, nor were they recorded to take up space in the Bible. These trials were designed by God to educate Israel concerning the basis by which He would deal with them. They are recorded so that we might understand what they should have been, what should have been done compared to what Israel did. This gives us great insight into why Israel got into latter predicaments and why God took the actions He did in order to fulfill His plans and purpose. Israel could not repossess the earth on God's behalf by the performance of the human nation alone. Understanding these trials gives us an understanding of what actually took place at Mount Sinai when the nation received the law. It also educates us regarding the 5 cycles of judgment in Leviticus 26. It is only when we understand these 5 trials and the giving of the law that we can understand the reason for the 5 cycles of judgment, which happen to be the entire history the nation given in nutshell form. From this time, there were 3 more trials that God brought about to prove that it would be only by His Jehovah-ness and grace that Israel will ever fulfill His plan and purpose. Exodus chapter 17 verse 1. And all the congregation of the children of Israel journeyed from the wilderness of Sin after their journeys according to the commandment of the Lord, and pitched in Rephidim. And there was no water for the people to drink. Wow. Now, before continuing, notice that they were moving in response to the commandment of the Lord. This shows us that they weren't just wandering willy-nilly about, but rather were moving to specific places God intended for them to go, so that He could teach them about His Jehovah-ness and grace. Israel was being directed into these trials on purpose. On purpose. Glory to God. God is such a good God. The way He does things has purpose. And we can see that Now, that's all my time for this session. But we'll be back in our next session. Session 9, we will definitely pick this up right where we left off. Talking about, we'll get right into trial number 3, no water at Rephidim. God bless you. If you have questions, write me, mychurch@rockamail.com.